Good morning. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here. I see so many flags, and actually what I'm going to speak today is about the flag missing, is the Palestinian flag missing. I'm going to assume for a second, and you'll hear that in a second, what should be how should the issue of refugees be looked when there is a Palestinian state? But let me start with a short background about the Reut Institute that could give you some information where I come from. So Reut was established 8 years ago, and its aim is to tackle the most pressing issues of Israel's needs for security and prosperity. It has dealt with numerous issues. Actually, one of the issues we've been dealing, and this is the connection to Bar-Ilan, is regional development. And part of that project was the Bar-Ilan medical faculty in Tzfat. Other issues are the delegitimization of the state of Israel. We've collaborated with Gerald in the past. We've dealt with the issue of national resilience, issue of science and technology, and of course, social and economic development, and of course, the Israeli-Palestinian issue. This was the first issue, and it has remained ever since. It's been Reut's analysis for the last 6 years now that since the Hamas is part of the Palestinian political system, it caused what we call a constitutional and political crisis in the Palestinian Authority that prevented from making any progress towards a permanent status agreement. I know it sounds very right-wing and that, but it's not. It's very, if we had time, I can explain detail by detail. It's very analytical in how the Palestinian political system is. In a way, you cannot do it with Hamas, and you cannot do it without Hamas. So if that is the case, what can be done? So we don't say that if as long as Hamas is part of the political system of the Palestinians, you cannot move forward. Actually, you can. And the governing paradigm for the last, let's say, 6 years or 7 years now has been not negotiated agreement. This is what I think the last 3 Israeli governments have tried to do, even the Palestinians. I was part of these governments. I know our Olmert really tried to push forward an agreement and could not succeed. And that was an exercise in futility, in fact. What can be done is what we call constructive unilateralism. And constructive unilateralism means you are doing unilateral steps under the overarching theme of two states for two people. This was the idea behind the disengagement. This is the idea behind the bottom-up state building by the Palestinians. And actually, and surprisingly, this is what the Palestinian bid for statehood in the UN is. It's a unilateral step that really anchors down the two-state for two-people solution. So if you accept or do not accept this notion, under this lens, I want to examine the issue of refugees. And I want to make 3 arguments and focus on 2 of them because of the shortage of time. The first one is the Israeli, kind of a very political Israeli short analysis about what Israel can do and what cannot. And if there is one issue that has been around, that Israel has been very firm, and it's in the Israeli consensus, is the issue of refugees. I don't see any significant concessions made by Israel with the issue of refugees. Not by this government, not by any government in the near future. I don't know what's going to happen 20 years from now. No, that's an issue, like Gerald said, it's an issue of identity. It's an issue how this country will look like. Therefore, I don't see any major concessions. Now, the Palestinians, and I've been in the negotiating rooms in the past, understand that. It's not that I'm not familiar with how the Israelis think. But they have to play the cards in a different way. First of all, it's an internal Palestinian issue. No Palestinian can come into a room and say, well, I make concession on the Palestinian rights to come back to their houses. And second, it's a bargaining chip. And the notion was for many years, since 1993, we said, yes, we will settle the Palestinian refugees issue towards the end of negotiation. Let's agree on all the other issues. And if that's the last chip, we can make trade-offs. So it's going to be on the table, but I don't see any concession being made. So it's sort of like an oxymoron or a paradox. Now, this is the first argument. The second one goes to the Palestinian side. That's the issue of representation. who represents the Palestinian people? I'll focus on that in a second, but the main argument is if the Palestinians succeed in being recognized in the UN, and that's still in process, eventually that's going to raise the Palestinian paradox of the issue of representations. Are they represented by the Palestinian State or the PLO? The third argument actually goes back to the connection between the Israeli position and the Palestinian paradox. And this is what I call, can the issue of refugees not be resolved? We're not talking about resolution, we're talking about dilution. Can be diluted in a way. Sometimes you have such a big problem and you cannot resolve the problem. What you're trying to do is you're trying to dilute it to a size that you can deal with. And this is my argument. The argument is that now there's a chance, if the Palestinian will become a state, there's a chance to dilute the issue of refugees to a size that you can really handle. Let me focus about the issue of Palestinian representation, and I'll get to the next issue. So who represent the Palestinian people? Well, the quick answer will be the PLO. The PLO was recognized by the Arab League in '74. Immediately after, it was recognized by the UN. It's a member. It's not a permanent member, but it has some standing in the UN. It is a signatory to all the Israeli-Palestinian agreements since '93 and on. Also, the last motion to the UN to be accepted as a state was submitted by the Mahmoud Abbas as the chairman of the PLO. So the formal answer will be the PLO. But is this still the case once the Palestinian state is being recognized? Well, if you ask most of the Palestinians, I'll guess the answer will be yes. We'll have a PLO, and we have the Palestinian state. In a way, a Palestinian state living side by side with the PLO. But if you look at the history, one of the premises of the political process was that the power and representative rights of the PLO will be transferred to the Palestinian state once the final status agreement are being signed. This was the premises that governed the agreement for 20 years, almost 20 years. This is unlike the Palestinian Authority that enjoy very limited rights and powers in terms of representation. It is also the logical of international law. I'm a lawyer, but I'm not as distinguished as Professor Yafa Zilberschatz. But the international says that, and it goes back to the Montevideo Convention, that part of the condition for a state to become, for an entity to become a state is population. And your responsibility for the population living in your country, your residents and citizens. And once there is a Palestinian state, you assume that all sovereign powers will be transferred to the state. That means that Palestinian flag will be here in this forum, that Palestinian state will have embassies in different capitals represented here, that the Palestinian state will have a representative, an ambassador to the UN, and all powers for conducting foreign relations, appearing before international institutions, will be transferred to the Palestinian state. This is the logic. While the PLO will be replaced, could survive as an organization, but not with the power it used to have before the Palestinian state. The question is, what about the Palestinian living not inside the Palestinian state territory? Now, this is, of course, the tough question about that. And in a way, I can argue that if the Palestinians of the Palestinian state truly want to represent all Palestinians, they should do what the newly state of Israel did in 1948. Call for all Jews, in this case Palestinians, to come back to the Palestinian state. Now, if the Palestinian diaspora will accept it, they become resident of the Palestinian state, the issue of representation does not exist. They will be represented by the Palestinian state. If they do not accept it, then the fallback position, they are represented by the countries in which they reside or live in. Now it's like a common sense according to international law. If you live in a place, in a certain territory, you've been represented by the country you live in. Now then the question arises, what about the PLO? Now, the PLO, it's still going to play a role in the Palestinian life, I guess. Nobody knows what's going to happen in the PLO afterwards, but it's not going to play the same role it played up until now. So in my sense, agreements after you have a Palestinian state will be signed with the Palestinian state. By way of comparison, the Jewish institutions, and I'm speaking about the Jewish institution in the 40s, before the establishment of the state, played a significant role. After the establishment of the state, there was no question about the powers and responsibilities of the State of Israel, while the Jewish institution can still play a significant role, but not with the powers of a state. Now, the big question remains, what about the refugees that seek to come back to the boundaries before 1948, to their houses before 1948? And that's a big question. So I'm not going to speak about rights. I guess this is what Professor Yafa Zilbershas is going to speak. But what I'm going to say that becoming a Palestinian citizen does not mean that you waive your claim under international law to go back to your house. It does not mean you waive your claim. So you can go back to the Palestinian state and still hold your claim. I personally don't think it's going to happen that the majority of Palestinians will come back to the state of Israel, to Jaffa, to Akko, to other places. But it doesn't mean that you cannot resolve this issue in other ways. Compensation, recognition, and other ways. So by going back to the point, and this is the last point I want to make about what's going to be the future, looking ahead, you can go back to the Palestinian state and still hold your claims. And this is important because people are going to say, what about those Palestinians who live abroad, want to go back to their houses? 2 words about UNWRA, and I want to go back. UNWRA, the UN Relief and Work Agency, and I want to sum it all up. So the estimated numbers of Palestinians, according to UNWRA, is millions. This is partly because of the very liberal way of counting Palestinians. I think the Palestinians are the only one who can inherit the rights to be refugees according to UNWRA. But my question is, what happens to UNWRA once the Palestinian state becomes into being? And my pretty clear answer to that, there should not be UNWRA, at least not in the Palestinian territory. All the funds, responsibilities, and powers of UNWRA should be transferred to the Palestinian state. And the most, probably the most important issue about that is there are refugees camping in the West Bank, North Jerusalem, and other places. And those refugee camps, there's no question about it, should be under the responsibility of the Palestinian state. They should take care of them. This is also a humanitarian issue, not sustaining the refugee status, in which you mean you only treat them in humanitarian ways and not developing them as equal citizens. That will be one of the challenges that the Palestinian state will have to face. So for me, UNWRA, the first day after the celebration of a Palestinian state should be dissolved in a Palestinian, yes, of course. It should be dissolved and should be replaced by the Palestinian state. So looking ahead, since it's my analysis that we have no room to maneuver, currently no room to maneuver with the issue of Palestinian refugees, the question being asked is what can be done in the meantime. And I will argue that the international community, who's represented partly here, can actually play a significant role in that, if we all play the cards right. So in a way, the issue of refugees cannot be resolved, but can be significantly reduced. I'm talking about if the following steps are going to be taken, going to be done. First, we're talking about the Palestinians should call all Palestinians, once there is a state, to come back to the Palestinian territory. This is pretty clear. Second, those who want to stay in the territory they live in could stay and should get full citizenship, which is crucial not because only for humanitarian ways, but it's crucial for those states who they live in, Jordan, Lebanon, other places, for the future, especially if we're talking about Jordan, in which a large part of the population are Palestinians. Third, those Palestinian refugee camps, which will be part of the Palestinian territory, should be in fact given a full Palestinian citizenship, should carry a Palestinian passport. UNWRA will be redirected, the funds to UNWRA will be directed to the Palestinian state. And finally, and probably most important, instead what the Israeli side is going to give, is I think there could be a trade-off. A trade-off between the willingness of the international community to dilute the issue of refugees and the Israeli implicit or explicit willingness to recognize a Palestinian state. If there is an opportunity, it actually exists in the trade-off between those two. Once you can dilute the issue of refugees, I think it's going to be easier in the long term for the Israeli government, not saying this government or other governments, to actually understand that recognizing a Palestinian state carries the benefits for Israeli policy and interests. Thank you very much.